Pessoal, um recadinho. Tudo que vocês tirarem foto aqui, quiserem postar, ou até falar para amigos que não estão aqui, seguir o @Colaboramérica. E também tudo que vocês postarem de vídeo, foto, colocar a hashtag Colaboramérica18. Porque todo esse conteúdo colaborativo depois vai ser exposto também no site, a galera pode seguir. Porque todas as ideias, elas precisam continuar sendo espalhadas aqui durante o evento. Avisem a galera, postem, coloquem a hashtag. Vamos passar isso para outras pessoas também. Obrigada.
Deus entendeu de dar a primazia. Veio uma primeira mão na Bahia. Primeira missa, primeiro índio abatido também. Deus deu.
A palestra vai ser, o painel aqui vai ser em inglês, então quem precisar de fone, quiser correr ali na porta para pegar, vai ter tradução simultânea.
Vamos agradecer também à Mãe Terra, que patrocinou nossos banquinhos. Acho que também acho que tem um biscoito por aí. Se vocês quiserem provar, maravilhoso. Muito obrigada. Pessoal, lembrando também que Colaboramérica tem lixo zero. Isso significa que todo o material vai ser encaminhado para incineradores ou para ateus. E também vocês receberam um copo no início. Vocês podem devolver esse copo ou comprar ele por R$5, tá? Vou começar aqui já com a Camila agora. Pode baixar o som, obrigada. Camila, muito obrigada, bem-vinda. De novo, você tá aí o dia, né? Tá todos os dias aí com a galera, enfim. Muito bem-vinda e vamos ouvir esse papinho aí de vocês.
Vamos lá. Obrigada, Amna. Bom, eu vou conversar em inglês aqui com o Philip para ficar mais dinâmico o diálogo, apesar dele já estar entendendo um pouquinho de português. Então, acho que quem já precisa de tradução já deve estar com os fones. Okay, so we'll start to talk about. We're actually going to start by the name of the proposed description that he proposed the theme for this conversation. So I'll start asking Philip, what is significance? How do you name significance, significados?
Yeah, welcome to everybody, and thanks for This Is Not the Truth for hosting this session. And we all know that we're living in a very complex time, and we're all trying to find meaning in our time, within our systems of economy, of ecology, to try to take us out of that time. But the journey I want us to go on today is exploring what is the greater power or the greater dimension that gives significance to this complex system we're living, and how can we live with our being that relation to that significance or that meaning. So that's the journey we're going on this afternoon.
Great, thank you. And to start, as a background for this conversation, I would like to ask Philip to explain us a little bit in the concept of, within the concept of complexity. what is a living system, an example of different living systems, and because we're always talking about how this manifestates in different systems, and are they different social systems, biological systems? How would you explain that to us as a background?
Yeah, so probably many of us are aware of this understanding of complexity, that things are made of relationships, and that it's not so much built out of fixed identities, but dynamic exchanges between actors. So if you think of a forest or an ecosystem, that ecosystem is much more than if you separate it out to the individual trees. Or if you think how our body works, the cells are not simply these tiny actors doing their own thing. There's a coherence that builds into our whole body. So this understanding of complexity as living systems has been around for about 60 years. And the more and more we look into like cells or genes, we find that the behavior is a product of the relationships between the different actors.
Someone wants to...
Is somebody waving? Or?
Do you want to say something? No. Okay. Thank you, Philip. And going a little bit further on the concept of living systems either being biological or social, and sometimes I understand that we mix them while explaining how systems behaves. I was also remembering of when we first met at Schumacher College earlier this year, when me and Maria Clara were starting our research for This Is Not the Truth. You gave us a really nice background as well in how our current paradigm nowadays is actually underpinned by old science knowledge, and then how, I would just like to ask you how these paradigms that comes from science are related to our economy, how it is nowadays, and also the economy we are trying here to build together with Colabora America and all the new economists thought.
Yeah. So when science emerged in the 16th and 17th century, it had the aim to look at really simple systems in which it was possible to ignore the effects of many relationships and to discover a kind of closed meaning that applied just to that system, by which we could understand, we could control, we could manipulate, and we could develop things like steam engines and mobile phones. But that was not the only scientific story that was being told. So for instance, in the 18th century and early 19th century, there was a poet and scientist called Goethe who said that you could not understand things from within the system themselves. It's not as simple as boiling things down till you get a mathematical truth. You have rather to look at the system, to look at all its relationships, to look at all its parts and how they're interacting, and then you have to make a leap in a way through your heart and your seeing to understand what is the greater ground that gives that plant that living identity. So Goethe was saying that although it's possible to isolate systems and treat them separate to their context, there is a completely different path in which you have to understand these systems of relationships for how they allow a coherent identity to express a greater ground than just that system itself. So you have to meet the plant as a living quality, as something that's telling you something, as like you're meeting another being. You're not simply meeting a mechanical system. So right through the science, we've had these two approaches of looking at nature as something mechanical and systematic, or looking at nature as something that is a medium for this greater being or greater identity to express itself through these natural means.
Yes, and then how from those two different perspectives that you gave the example of how we look to nature, how was this actually guiding us in terms of building our current economic system and our current dominant paradigm, if we could say so?
Yes. So, what's happened? Is this gone? No. What's happened is that we've kind of forgotten that nature has these two aspects. One is which meaning comes from outside the system. The other is one like a mechanism in which it's closed and we can understand it. And what we've tried to do is focus more and more on that closed kind of mechanism, that closed order by which we can try to explain or understand or order something as if it's what we could control. And of course, that's part of what we can do. We can create economies, we can create technologies. But what the journey I want us to go on today is one of reconnecting or re-encountering what is it that moves us as something alive and full of meaning, and something that is beyond who we are in our order and our technology and our economy, but it's something that grounds us in our very being. And so when we make this move, it's not to say there are systems, and to those systems we can add experience and meaning and beautiful aesthetic qualities we want to see. It's that this relationship to meaning is at the very core of our beings. And we've kind of been brainwashed into forgetting this fundamental relationship that is not something that is like a doctrine or something already there that we have to believe in, but it's something we have to journey towards, and that all life kind of journeys towards meaning in some way or another. Life is never satisfied just going around in its own order, and kind of our economies now are quite happy just making money for the sake of money. But what's the relation to something higher? That has totally been ignored or dropped or lost from sight.
Thank you. Would that bring us maybe to the matter of choice that you were telling me a bit before?
Yeah,
maybe
so
you can comment a bit further on that.
Yeah, so this question that we are neither born into a world that we can understand mechanically or we can explain just through its order, nor are we born into a world whose meaning is already evident. All we have to do is turn up at the church or the synagogue to hear that meaning. It's rather that we're living in a world where both these things are true at the same time. So Newton's mechanical universe is true at the same time as Goethe's meaning and significant universe. And the way we have to live in that world is that we have to choose to discover meaning, to discover significance. And in choosing to go on that path, we find the ground of our being. We find who we are. So our being is not something that's either scientific and material or spiritual and far away. It's rather that our very being is making that choice. It is going to look through our life for that greater essence or quality that can inform who we are. And that doesn't mean we lose track of science, because that's also partly who we are. And so in this sense, our being really is founded on choice. It's not founded either on a ground of understanding on which we can stand, nor is it founded on simply a faith that exists out there, which we can kind of touch whenever we want. It is rather that we're in this fluid world where the meaning we make is the ground of who we are. And so in choosing who we are, we create the world together.
So could we say this meaning is made out of the relationships not from different parts, but the relationship among them?
Yes, so as we've seen, say in our body, we have cells that communicate together, very different cells whose relationship creates a function. And in some sense, we can see those relationships as closed. We can take them outside the body, we can study them, we can name them, we can categorize them. And in that sense, the cells have an existence as a closed system. But at the same time, those cells are living in the meaning of our whole body. So the cells are not acting outside the context of a larger truth, which is our identities. And similarly with us, that we can go to school, we can learn things, we can create systems of understanding, but when we start traveling, or when we're in moments of deep intensity, then we learn that there is something more than just our systems of thought. There's something more than thinking we control the world. And it's at that point that those relationships come together in a larger meaning. And it's really what we are journeying towards at the moment, is that our systems of order aren't enough on their own. We need to, again, become open to this greater ground of meaning on which to understand how we can go forward.
Yes, and also coming back to the concept of living systems as either biological living systems as a body or a cell, and social living systems as a network of people or other social kinds of organizations. Could you comment around the idea of the opposite way that a system could be open, or we give meaning, and sometimes when we give meaning, we are sort of giving some boundaries as well, and defining, thus maybe confining?
Yeah.
How do you see that? Is it opposite, or?
Yeah, so living systems are not either or. So sometimes the cells I was talking about are a closed system, and as a closed system they have a function. And similarly, some of our technologies are closed. We don't want the aeroplane we're in to suddenly open up to complexity. We want it to be a closed system that flies and does its function. But there's always this fluidity that you can see systems either as closed, as if they have their own meaning, their own function, and you can make a boundary around it and hold everything that happens in advance because you know how that behaves. Or at the same time, it's living as an open system in which its meaning is not coming just from within its own actors, its own language, but rather it's opening up to something which gives it identity. So there's always this interplay of these two approaches, and it is this interplay which gives the diversity and the depth of life.
Great. And then I was wondering, when you were explaining, if this openness is an openness to emergence, that maybe some people know about the concept, maybe not, so maybe we could explain a little bit, or
Yeah.
at least in any case, it would be great to see in your words what's emergence, or how is this openness related to other kinds of power or rules or ways that it unfolds into meaning?
Yeah, so a good example of emergence is our climate. So we have water in the ground, and they are taken up by trees, and the trees evaporate that water, the leaves, and the water forms clouds in the sky, and the sky then, the rain comes, especially the last 2 days, and the rain then goes back into the soil. And so emergence is seeing that climate does not come from any of those actors individually. The water in the ground, the leaves, the clouds, But the emergence is seeing that climate comes out of the relationship between all these elements. And a lot of arguments about climate change fail to significantly understand this cycle. So if we damage any element of that cycle, like we cut down the trees, then the climate is going to be affected, because we're changing the balance of how all these things together create the climate. And what I'm suggesting is that it's the same with human beings, that we can't, we have to live the fact that our quality as human beings is something emergent. It's something that there is a whole quality that characterizes who we are and how we behave. It's not that there's just society and culture and this government or that government system. And there's a story here about Goethe that for the last few years we've been living in a place that seemed very rational. It seemed like there would be many stories that could take us forward. And at Schumacher College, I heard many of those stories being spoken. But now, that very light center, that visionary center, has kind of got completely clouded over in the last couple of years. And there is no story telling us what we must do. Instead, it's like the opposite, that the center is dark, but there's many peripheral journeys, many peripheral people who are exploring how can we go forward. And this was Goethe's understanding of color, that the darkness is as important to defining color as the light. We do not just need visions at this moment, or explanations or guidances of how to go forward with science or the economy, but we have to accept this darkness of the center and nevertheless surrender to the journey, which now is no longer a journey of trying to build something through sustainability, through new economy, through new ideas, but it's about a personal surrender of how can we allow this new meaning to anticipate the light coming, the light that can give clarity in the dark times we are in. And this was exactly Goethe's view of society and of science. So he also wrote a book about Faust, which was this individual who sold his soul to the devil, who lived completely in the darkness. And much of the life of Faust rings true with our culture and our society at the moment. But what Goethe was trying to say was that when we allow the darkness, when we do not try to orient ourselves by a vision of where we can all move together, then a complementary quality of color emerges. And that it's that quality that we want to stimulate at the moment, one that comes out of us accepting that where we are going in this dark time is not going to be defined from within the system, but from without, by making a further step into understanding who we are within a greater context and ground of experience.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Do we have time for a couple of questions? No? Okay. So I will thank you, Philip, so much for being here. And thank you, Colabora America, for having This Is Not the Truth as partners and making this happen. E a gente pode continuar a conversa ali fora com o Philip também. Ele só vai ficar aqui no Rio até domingo. Então, convido todos a gente continuar o papo ali. Muito obrigada. Thank you, Philip.